I'm here because I don't know where else to turn. I've been lurking for a while, reading all your stories and thinking that's tough, but it's not me. Well, now it is me, and it feels like my whole world's fallen apart. So, I'm Greg, 36. My wife, Sandra, 34, and I have been married for 9 years. We've got 2 kids, Ellie 7 and Max 5. We met in college, one of those I just knew kind of stories, or at least I thought so. She was smart, funny, and had this way of making everyone around her feel seen. That's why this hurts so much. It started about 3 months ago. Sandra became distant. You know when someone's physically present but feels a million miles away? That was her. I asked if everything was okay and she said, just stressed with work. She's a marketing director, always juggling deadlines, so I believed her. I mean, why wouldn't I? Then little things started adding up. She'd smile at her phone more than she smiled at me. Her texts suddenly needed privacy, just work stuff, Greg. Date nights stopped happening. When I tried to plan something, she'd say, let's raincheck. I'm exhausted. I thought I was losing my mind. Was I being paranoid? Or was something really off? I convinced myself I was overthinking. I mean, Sandra wasn't the cheating type. She hated liars, wouldn't even let the kids watch shows with sneaky characters. Trust is everything, she'd say. I repeated that to myself like a mantra. Then last Friday happened. Sandra was supposed to be at a team dinner. She left the house in her best dress, hair and makeup done like it was prom night. I teased her, saying, they better not be stealing you away. She just smiled and said, you've got nothing to worry about. But around 9 p.m., Ellie needed her stuffed bear, which we'd accidentally left in Sandra's car. When I checked her location, thank you, family sharing, she wasn't at the restaurant. She was at a hotel. My stomach dropped. I tried calling her, but she didn't pick up. I told the kids I'd be right back and drove over. On the way, 100 scenarios ran through my head. Maybe she was meeting a client? Maybe it was innocent? Maybe. I parked across the street and waited. At 9:47 she walked out with some guy. He was taller than me, dressed like he just stepped out of a catalog. They laughed, touched arms, too comfortable. She kissed his cheek before they got into separate cars. I barely managed to snap a photo before my hands started shaking. I drove home in a daze. My mind screamed, say something now. But when I got home, Max was crying because he'd spilled juice and Ellie was watching TV. I just couldn't. Sandra came home a little past midnight. I pretended to be asleep, though my heart was pounding like a drum. She crawled into bed, kissed my shoulder and whispered, love you. I didn't reply. I'm sitting here writing this, not sure what to do next. It feels like my life split in half in that parking lot. Do I confront her? Wait for more proof? How do I protect the kids from this mess? I keep looking at the picture on my phone and wondering how we got here. What would you do? The morning after I saw her, I woke up feeling hollow. I kept replaying everything in my head. The hotel, the guy, her kiss on my shoulder like nothing was wrong. My phone buzzed with a calendar reminder, Ellie's soccer game at 11. Life didn't stop because my heart was breaking. Sandra acted like her usual self, humming while making breakfast. She kissed me on the cheek when I walked into the kitchen. Morning, sleepyhead. It was like she was mocking me. I couldn't even look her in the eye. Morning, I mumbled, keeping my voice steady. The kids came bounding in and for a second I thought about confronting her right there. But the thought of Ellie and Max hearing us argue stopped me. They deserve better than this. At the game I tried to focus on Ellie, but Sandra was glued to her phone the whole time, smiling like she was in on some private joke. My stomach churned. Was she texting him? I started noticing every little thing, how she'd tilt the screen away from me, the quick taps on the keyboard, her satisfied grin. On the way home I asked casually, how was the team dinner last night? She didn't even flinch. Good. Long though. Everyone was in a talkative mood. Who was there? I asked, keeping my tone light. The usual, she said without missing a beat. Susan, Alan, Michelle. You know how they get after a few drinks. It was such a confident lie. That's what scared me. She didn't hesitate, didn't stumble, just rattled off names like she'd rehearsed it. I nodded, pretending to believe her. But inside I was boiling. Back home, I told her I needed to run some errands and left her with the kids. I parked at a nearby lot and sat in the car, staring at my phone. My mind was spinning. Should I call her out? Hire a private investigator? Talk to a lawyer? Instead, I texted my best friend Mike. "Hey, can we talk? Need advice?" Mike called me right away. "What's going on, man?" I hesitated before saying, "I think Sandra's cheating on me." The silence on the other end was deafening. Finally he said, "What makes you think that?" I spilled everything: her being distant, the lies, the hotel, the guy. Mike listened without interrupting, which was a first for him. "Man," he finally said, "I don't know what to tell you. That's rough. You sure you're not overthinking it?" "I saw her with him, Mike. What else could it be?" He sighed. "Look, you need to talk to her. You can't live like this, wondering, guessing. Get the truth out of her." His advice made sense, but I wasn't ready. Not yet. I needed to know the whole story first. I thanked him and hung up, still unsure of what to do. Back at home, Sandra was playing board games with the kids. She looked up and smiled like nothing was wrong, and for a second I almost convinced myself I was imagining things. But the image of her with that guy kept flashing in my head. That night, after the kids went to bed, I finally decided to start digging. I sat on the couch next to her while she watched TV and scrolled through her phone. "Mind if I borrow your phone for a sec?" "Mine's dead and I need to check something," I asked, keeping my tone casual. Her smile froze. She hesitated for just a second before handing it over. "Sure. Just don't go snooping," she joked, laughing nervously. I pretended to look up a recipe, but my heart was racing. Her phone was locked, but I knew her passcode. She used the kids' birthdays. I checked her messages, email, and social media. Nothing. It was spotless, like she'd cleaned it up ahead of time. My stomach sank. She was covering her tracks. I handed the phone back, forcing a smile. "Thanks." She leaned over and kissed me on the cheek. "What would you do without me?" I wanted to scream, probably live without being lied to. But I just nodded. Later that night, I sat in the dark with the kids' baby monitor in my hand, listening to their soft breathing. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, ready to jump but terrified of the fall. I had to find out the truth. The next day, I decided I couldn't live with this cloud over my head. I had to know. Every second of doubt felt like 1,000 needles under my skin. But how do you catch someone who's good at lying? I started with her routines. Sandra was meticulous: same gym days, same coffee shop stops, same schedule. On Monday, she'd mentioned a work meeting that would run late. I acted like I didn't care, just gave her a casual, "Sounds busy. Good luck." When Monday came, I took off work early and parked near her office. I didn't even know what I was looking for. Maybe confirmation that I was losing my mind. But when she came out at 6 p.m., she didn't head to the parking lot. Instead, she walked down the street, checking her phone every few seconds. My pulse spiked. I followed from a distance, feeling ridiculous and shaky. After about 3 blocks, she stopped at a cafe and slipped into a booth near the back. And there he was, the guy from the hotel. My blood ran cold. They didn't do anything obvious, just leaned in close, talking like old friends. But her expression, that soft smile, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear, was the same way she used to look at me. They could have been discussing spreadsheets for all I knew, but it didn't matter. She was there with him, while I was home with the kids every night, trusting her. I took a couple of photos from the sidewalk, trying not to shake so much that they'd come out blurry. Then I walked away before I did something stupid like confront them right there in public. I wasn't ready for a scene. Not yet. Back home, Sandra breezed through the door at 8 p.m., carrying a to-go bag. "They fed us at the meeting, but I grabbed you something on the way home," she said, placing a sandwich in front of me. I stared at her, unsure if I wanted to cry or scream. She was playing her role so well, like nothing was wrong. "Thanks," I mumbled. "You okay?" she asked, tilting her head like she was genuinely concerned. "Just tired," I said, forcing a smile. "Long day?" That night I couldn't sleep. The images of her and that guy in the cafe burned in my brain. Who was he? How long had this been going on? And how much of our life had been a lie? The next morning I called Mike again. "She's definitely cheating," I said as soon as he picked up. "Greg, man. I'm sorry. What are you gonna do?" "I don't know. I can't confront her yet. I need more." "More? Like what?" "You already know." "I need her to admit it," I said. "I need to see it in her face. Otherwise, she'll just deny it." Mike sighed. "Be careful. This stuff messes with your head. Don't let it drag you down, okay?" Over the next few days, I kept my head down and played along. I still kissed her goodbye in the mornings, helped with bedtime stories, laughed at her jokes when the kids were around. But inside I was a storm. Every smile from her felt like a slap in the face. That Friday I took another step. I called in sick to work and drove to her office after dropping off the kids. I waited until she left for lunch, alone this time. She drove to a nearby park, sat in her car for a bit and then got out. I followed her on foot as she walked along a trail, phone in hand. She stopped on a bench, glanced around, then made a call. I hid behind a tree and strained to hear. "I can't talk long," she said, her voice soft. "No, he doesn't know. I'm being careful." My chest tightened. She laughed. "I miss you too. Monday was nice." I didn't need to hear more. I walked back to my car, my ears ringing. Sandra wasn't just lying to me, she was building a whole other life behind my back. By the weekend, I knew I had to confront Sandra eventually. But I wanted it on my terms, not hers. If I just exploded with anger, she'd spin it somehow, turn me into the bad guy or twist the truth. No, I needed to be calm and prepared. I wanted her caught so thoroughly that there'd be no room for lies. Sunday morning, Sandra was in full perfect mom mode, making pancakes with Ellie and Max while music played in the kitchen. I stood in the doorway, watching them laugh and joke like everything was normal. It almost made me second-guess myself, like I was the one ruining our family by digging into this. But then I remembered her words on the phone, "I miss you too." I left the house and drove to Mike's place. He was out front working on his car when I pulled up. "You look like hell," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "Feel like it too," I muttered, getting out of the car. "I need your help." He leaned against the hood, arms crossed. "What's the plan?" "I'm gonna confront her," I said. "But not until I have proof she can't deny. I need her to admit it, Mike. Not just for me, for the kids." Mike nodded slowly. "You sure you want to go down this road? It's not gonna be pretty." "Nothing about this is pretty," I snapped, then softened my tone. "Sorry. I can't let her get away with this. She's lying to me, to the kids, to everyone. I need her to face what she's done." After a moment, Mike said, "All right. What do you need?" The next few days were a blur of quiet planning. I researched private investigators but couldn't afford their rates. Instead, I bought a small voice recorder and a tracking device online. I felt sick doing it, like I was sinking to her level, but I didn't see another option. On Wednesday, the devices arrived. That night, while Sandra was in the shower, I slipped the tracker into her car. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it, but I managed to wedge it under the driver's seat. Then I set up the recorder in the living room, tucked between some books on the shelf. It wasn't ideal, but I figured it might catch something. I hated myself for it. Spying on her felt wrong, but what choice did I have? She wasn't going to tell me the truth on her own. By Friday, the tracker paid off. Sandra told me she was meeting a client for lunch, but the app showed her car parked at the same hotel as before. My stomach churned as I watched the dot on my phone. When she got home that evening, she was all smiles again, asking if I wanted to order takeout. I said sure, pretending everything was fine. That night, after she fell asleep, I checked the voice recorder. Most of it was just TV noise and the kids talking, but then I heard Sandra's voice. I told him I'd be late because of a meeting. He didn't even question it. A pause. Then her laugh, light and airy like the Sandra I used to know. "I don't know how much longer I can do this. It's getting harder to keep up the act." I shut it off, my hands trembling. That was all I needed to hear. Saturday morning, I texted Mike. It's time. He called me immediately. You sure? I've got enough. I need to do this before it eats me alive. You want me there? No, I said. This is between me and her. All right. Just call me if you need anything, okay? I promised I would and hung up. Then I went back inside where Sandra was making coffee. She turned and smiled at me. Morning. Want some? I stared at her, wondering how she could be so casual when she'd been tearing our family apart behind my back. But I kept my face neutral. Actually, I was thinking we should talk, I said. Her smile faltered just slightly. Oh. About what? About us, I said, my voice steady. And where you've been going lately. Her eyes flickered, just for a second. Then she laughed nervously. What do you mean? I didn't answer. I just stared at her, waiting. Sandra set her coffee cup down on the counter, her smile wavering. You're being weird, Greg. What's this about? I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. I know you've been lying to me. I know about the hotel. About him. Her face froze for a split second before she forced a laugh. Greg, what are you talking about? You're not making sense. I pulled out my phone and showed her the photo I'd taken of her and the man outside the hotel. Don't play dumb, Sandra. This is you. Don't even try to deny it. Her expression changed, panic flickering in her eyes before she crossed her arms defensively. You're following me now? What, you don't trust me? Trust you? I said, my voice rising despite my effort to stay calm. How am I supposed to trust you when you're sneaking around with some guy, lying about where you've been? She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. For once she was at a loss. Who is he? I demanded. How long has this been going on? Sandra shook her head, her voice trembling. It's not what you think. He's just a coworker. We've been working on a project together. At a hotel. I cut her off. At a cafe? While telling me you're at meetings. Don't insult my intelligence, Sandra. I heard you on the phone. I know what's going on. Her face crumpled, and she sank onto a kitchen chair, her hands trembling as she covered her face. Greg, please. It's not. I didn't mean for this to happen. My chest tightened. Didn't mean for what to happen, Sandra? Say it. She didn't answer, just shook her head as tears streamed down her face. Say it. I shouted, slamming my hand on the table. At least have the decency to admit it. She finally looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. Yes, okay. I've been seeing someone. But it's not serious, it didn't mean anything. The room spun, and I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. Not serious? You've been sneaking around for months, lying to me, lying to the kids. How is that not serious? I was lonely, Greg. She cried. You've been so focused on work, on the kids, on everything else. I felt invisible. He made me feel seen. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I've been breaking my back to keep this family going, Sandra. I've been doing everything I can to make you happy. And this is how you repay me. I know I messed up, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I love you. I love our family. I don't want to lose you. I laughed bitterly. Love? You call this love? Sneaking around, lying to my face, betraying everything we built together. That's not love, Sandra. That's selfishness. The weight of her actions settled over me, crushing and suffocating. I felt like I was drowning, like every breath hurt. I need you to leave, I said finally, my voice cold and flat. Sandra's eyes widened. What? Greg, no. Please, we can fix this. We can go to counseling. I said leave, I snapped, cutting her off. Go stay with your mom or your sister or whoever you've been lying to. But you can't stay here. Not right now. The kids ran into the room at that moment, Ellie clutching her favorite stuffed bear. Why are you yelling, Daddy? She asked, her voice small and scared. Sandra started to speak, but I held up a hand. We're just talking, sweetheart. Go back to your room, okay? Mommy will be back later. Ellie hesitated, then nodded and left with Max trailing behind her. Sandra turned to me, desperation in her eyes. Greg, please. Don't do this. Don't break up our family. You already did, I said, my voice like ice. Sandra packed a bag in silence. I stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching her every move. Part of me wanted her to fight, to argue, to scream, something to show that she cared. But she didn't. She just sniffled, wiped her face, and zipped up her suitcase. When she finally turned to me, her voice was a whisper. I'll go to my sister's. I don't know what to say to the kids. I'll handle it, I said, my tone clipped. They don't need to know everything. Not yet. She nodded, then hesitated at the door. Greg. I'm sorry. I didn't answer. The word felt hollow now, like it meant nothing coming from her. She waited for a second, then walked out. The sound of the door closing echoed in the quiet house. That night, I sat on the couch in the dark, staring at nothing. The kids had gone to bed after a movie, their innocent laughter cutting through the heaviness in the air. I told them Mommy needed to stay with Aunt Clara for a little while because of grown-up stuff. Ellie asked if Mommy would be back for her dance recital next week. I told her yes, even though I didn't know if it was true. I picked up my phone, my thumb hovering over Mike's number. Instead, I set it down and buried my face in my hands. Talking wouldn't change anything. Sandra's words kept replaying in my head. He made me feel seen. Was I really that blind? Had I failed her as a husband, as a partner? Or was that just her excuse to justify what she'd done? The anger hit me in waves, sharp, bitter, and relentless. I grabbed the pillow next to me and hurled it across the room. It hit the wall with a pathetic thud. I wanted to scream, to smash something, to make her feel the same pain I was feeling. Instead, I just sat there, staring at the floor until my vision blurred. The next morning, I woke up to Ellie shaking me. Daddy, you fell asleep on the couch. I forced a smile, ruffling her hair. Just one of those nights, kiddo. What do you want for breakfast? She grinned. Pancakes. Like Mommy makes. My stomach twisted. I'll see what I can do. After breakfast, I finally called Mike. She's gone, I said as soon as he picked up. Gone as in? He asked cautiously. Gone as in packed her bags and went to her sister's. He sighed. How are you holding up? I don't know, I admitted. Angry. Hurt. Empty. All of it. You did the right thing, Greg. She betrayed you. You can't just let her walk all over you. Yeah, but now what? The kids? The house? Everything. One step at a time, he said. Focus on the kids. They're what matters most right now. Later that day, Sandra texted me. Can we talk? Not about us, about the kids. I want to see them. I stared at the message for a long time before replying. We'll figure something out. Not today. She didn't argue, just sent back. Okay. By the time evening rolled around, the kids were tucked in, and the house felt impossibly quiet. I scrolled through my phone, absent-mindedly looking at photos of our family vacations, birthdays, holidays. Each smile, each moment felt like a cruel joke now. How much of it was real? How much of it was just an act? As I sat there, I realized something. I didn't just lose my wife. I lost the life I thought we had, the future I thought we were building. And now I had to figure out how to start over. The days after Sandra left were a blur of routines. Wake up, get the kids ready, drop them at school, work, pick them up, dinner, bedtime. I threw myself into keeping everything running like normal because if I stopped to think, the weight of everything threatened to crush me. Sandra texted every day, asking about the kids, wanting updates. How's Ellie doing in school? Can I call Max before bed tonight? When can I see them? I kept my replies short and to the point. I didn't want to fight, but I wasn't ready to forgive or forget. The trust was gone, and every message from her felt like salt in an open wound. On Wednesday, I finally agreed to let her see the kids. Come by after dinner, I texted. They'll be ready for bed, but you can tuck them in. When she arrived, Ellie ran to her, throwing her arms around her waist. Max wasn't far behind, clinging to her leg like he thought she might disappear again. Watching them, I felt a pang of guilt. Whatever Sandra had done to me, she was still their mom and they missed her. "Hey," she said softly, glancing at me as she knelt to hug the kids. "Hi," I replied flatly, keeping my distance. She stayed for about an hour, reading them bedtime stories and kissing them goodnight. When she came downstairs, she lingered near the door like she wanted to say something. "Thanks for letting me see them," she said. I nodded. "They're your kids too. Greg, I know you're angry and you have every right to be. But I hope we can find a way to move forward. For them." Her words felt rehearsed, like she'd practiced them on the way over. I didn't respond, just opened the door for her to leave. She hesitated, looking like she wanted to say more, but finally stepped outside. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about what moving forward even meant. Did she want to fix our marriage? Co-parent? Sweep everything under the rug? And could I even consider any of those options after what she'd done? I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling when my phone buzzed. It was a message from Mike. "Hey, you okay? Wanna grab a drink this weekend?" I stared at the screen, tempted to say yes. A night out might be exactly what I needed. But then I thought about Ellie and Max. If I wasn't home, who would be? Sandra wasn't there anymore. "Can't." "Kids," I replied. He sent back a thumbs-up emoji, but it felt like another reminder of how much my life had changed. The next day, while cleaning up the kids' playroom, I found one of Sandra's old journals tucked behind a stack of books. It wasn't something I'd ever snooped through before. I'd always believed in respecting her privacy. But now, I wasn't sure where the boundaries were anymore. I flipped it open to the most recent entries. The handwriting was rushed and messy, like she'd been writing in a hurry. "I don't know what I'm doing. Greg doesn't see me anymore. I feel like a ghost in my own house. But it's not his fault. He's a good man, a good father. So why do I feel this way?" Meeting him was unexpected. It wasn't supposed to mean anything, but now I'm in too deep. I hate myself for it. I wish I could stop. I closed the journal, my heart pounding. The words were like a punch to the gut. Part of me wanted to burn it, to erase the evidence of her betrayal. But another part of me wanted to read every page, to understand what had gone so wrong between us. That night, I stared at the journal sitting on the kitchen table. I wasn't sure if I felt better or worse for having read it. But one thing was clear: Sandra had been struggling long before she met him. And somehow I'd missed it. The journal sat on the kitchen table like it was mocking me. It was Sandra's voice, her unfiltered thoughts, written in a time when she must have felt completely alone. Part of me wanted to read more, but the other part, the one still drowning in anger, wasn't sure I could handle it. In the end, curiosity won. Late that night, after the kids were asleep, I opened it again. I flipped back a few pages to see if there were clues about when everything started. I think about him more than I should. It's stupid. Greg's a good husband, a good father. But sometimes I feel like we're just roommates. He's so busy with the kids and work. I don't even know the last time we had a real conversation. That hit me like a ton of bricks. Roommates? I thought we were solid. Sure, life had been hectic. Parenthood isn't exactly glamorous, but I never realized she felt this way. The entries grew darker as I read on. I didn't mean for this to happen. It was just coffee at first. Then lunch. He listens. He makes me feel alive. I know it's wrong, but I don't know how to stop. If Greg found out, it would destroy him. It would destroy everything. I slammed the journal shut, my stomach twisting. Alive? She needed someone else to feel alive. What did that make me? A placeholder? The resentment bubbled up, sharp and bitter. The next morning I was distracted. Ellie noticed. "Daddy, you're quiet. Are you okay?" I forced a smile. "Just tired, sweetheart." She nodded, satisfied with my answer, but her concern lingered in her eyes. Max, oblivious, was busy trying to build a tower of pancakes on his plate. Sandra texted mid-morning. I was hoping to take the kids to the park this afternoon. Is that okay? I stared at the message, debating whether to let her. Every instinct screamed to say no. But keeping the kids from her wasn't the answer. They deserved both parents, even if I wanted nothing to do with her. Fine. Pick them up at 1. Her reply was instant. Thank you. I'll have them back by dinner. When she arrived, I didn't say much, just helped the kids into their jackets and watched as they ran to her car. Sandra lingered for a moment. Greg, how are you? She asked softly. I'm fine, I said curtly, not meeting her eyes. She sighed but didn't push. I'll bring them back at 6. With the house empty, I had too much time to think. I called Mike. Can we meet? I need to get out of here. Of course, he said. My place in an hour. When I arrived, Mike handed me a beer and motioned for me to sit. So, what's the latest? I hesitated, then told him about the journal. About her feelings of loneliness, her excuses, and the affair. She said she didn't mean for it to happen, I added bitterly. Like that makes it okay. Mike listened, shaking his head. Man, I don't know how you're holding it together. You're a better man than me. I don't feel like I'm holding it together, I admitted. I feel like I'm falling apart. And the worst part? I can't stop wondering if I'm partly to blame. Mike leaned forward. Greg, stop. This isn't your fault. She had a choice. She could have come to you, talked to you, worked through it with you. Instead, she went behind your back. That's on her, not you. I nodded, but his words didn't ease the guilt gnawing at me. If I'd noticed sooner, could I have stopped it? When Sandra dropped the kids off later, she didn't linger. I watched from the window as she drove away, my chest heavy with unresolved questions. The journal had given me a glimpse into her mind, but it wasn't enough. I needed to know the whole story. That night I sent her a text. We need to talk. Just us. Tomorrow night. Her reply came quickly. Okay. Sandra arrived just after the kids went to bed. She looked nervous, clutching her purse like it was a shield. We sat at the dining table, the silence between us heavy. I'm here, she said softly. What do you want to know? I cut straight to it. Why? When did this start? She looked down at her hands. About 6 months ago. It wasn't supposed to mean anything, Greg. I felt invisible. Like you didn't see me anymore. I clenched my fists under the table. And instead of talking to me, you ran to someone else? Her eyes filled with tears. I didn't know how to tell you. I thought you'd be angry or dismiss me. I made a mistake, an awful mistake, but I didn't mean to hurt you. Did you love him? The words felt like acid in my throat. No, she whispered. It was never about love. He was just there. That's supposed to make this better? I asked, my voice breaking. She shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. No. I know it doesn't. I stood, unable to sit still. You've shattered everything, Sandra. Our marriage, our family, it's all broken now. How do you expect me to fix this? I don't, she said quietly. But I want to try for the kids, for us. If you'll let me. I didn't answer. The hurt was too fresh, her betrayal too raw. I need time. She nodded, wiping her face. I'll wait, Greg. However long it takes. As she left, I felt no relief, just more questions and a growing sense of loss. The next few days felt like walking through quicksand. Sandra's words replayed in my head. I felt invisible. I didn't know how to tell you. It was like she was blaming me for her betrayal, but deep down I wondered if there was truth to it. Had I really ignored her without realizing? Mike stopped by one evening. How'd the talk go? He asked, sitting on the couch with a beer. I shrugged. She admitted it. Said she didn't love him, but it happened because she felt unseen. Now she wants to fix things. And you? He asked. What do you want? I hesitated, staring at the floor. I don't know. Part of me wants to fight for the family, for the kids. But the other part? I don't know if I'll ever trust her again. Mike nodded. You don't have to decide right now. But don't let guilt push you into something you're not ready for. Sandra texted the next morning. I miss you and the kids. Can we talk more soon? I stared at the message for a long time. Did I owe her more conversations? Or was it time to focus on rebuilding my life without her? For now, I typed back. Not yet. I need more time. Her reply came almost instantly. Okay. I'll wait. But how long could either of us wait before things fell apart completely? After days of going back and forth in my head, I decided I needed clarity. Not for Sandra's sake but for my own and for the kids. That's how I ended up sitting in a therapist's office on a Thursday afternoon, explaining the mess my life had become. She says she wants to fix things, I told the therapist. But I don't even know if I want that. I can't stop thinking about what she did. The therapist nodded. It's normal to feel conflicted. Trust, once broken, is hard to rebuild. But the first step is deciding if you're open to trying. I sat in silence for a moment before admitting, I don't know. That evening, I called Sandra. We should try counseling, I said flatly. If we're going to co-parent, we need to figure this out, even if it's just for the kids. Her voice cracked when she answered, Thank you, Greg. I'll do whatever it takes. It doesn't mean we're getting back together, I said firmly. I'm doing this for clarity, for them, not for us. I understand, she said quietly. We scheduled our first session for the following week. In the meantime, I focused on the kids. Ellie and Max were my anchors, their laughter the only thing keeping me grounded. But even they noticed the tension. Is Mommy mad at you? Ellie asked one night after dinner. I knelt beside her and smoothed her hair. No, sweetie. Mommy and I just have some grown-up things to figure out. Will she come home soon? She asked. I hesitated. I don't know yet, but we both love you and Max very much. That won't change. She seemed satisfied with that answer, but it tore me up inside. How could I explain something I didn't fully understand myself? The day of our first counseling session felt like walking toward an execution. I didn't know if I was ready to hear more of Sandra's truths, or if I was ready to face my own role in all of this. But there I was, sitting in the therapist's office again, this time with Sandra across from me. She looked nervous, her hands twisting in her lap. The therapist started by setting some ground rules. No interrupting, no yelling, and no blaming. Greg, the therapist said, turning to me. Why don't we start with you? What do you hope to get out of this session? I took a deep breath. I want to understand why this happened. How we went from being partners to this. And I want to figure out if it's even possible to move forward. The therapist nodded, then turned to Sandra. And you? Sandra's voice was shaky. I want to fix what I broke. I know I can't undo what I did, but I want Greg to see that I'm still here, that I love him and our family. Her words felt hollow, but I didn't interrupt. The therapist guided us through a difficult conversation. Sandra admitted that she'd started feeling disconnected from me years ago, but never told me because she didn't want to cause conflict. I thought I could handle it on my own, she said. But I felt so alone. She paused, catching herself. When I started talking to him, it was like I mattered again. I know it was wrong, but I got caught up in that feeling. And now? The therapist prompted. Sandra looked at me, her eyes full of tears. Now I just want to rebuild what we had. I want to be honest, even if it's hard. I crossed my arms. Honesty would have been nice before you cheated, Sandra. She flinched but nodded. You're right. I should have told you how I felt. I'm sorry, Greg. I really am. The session ended with the therapist asking us to reflect on what we wanted moving forward. Sandra said she was willing to do anything, counseling, boundaries, full transparency. I said I needed time to decide. Driving home, I felt more confused than ever. Sandra's words sounded sincere, but was sincerity enough? Could I ever look at her the same way again? The counseling session left me with more questions than answers. Sandra's apologies seemed genuine, but her actions had left a scar so deep that I wasn't sure it could ever heal. Back at home, I sat in the quiet after the kids went to bed, replaying her words in my mind. I just want to rebuild what we had. The problem was I wasn't sure there was anything left to rebuild. The next day, Sandra texted me. "Thank you for coming to counseling. It means a lot to me." I stared at the message for a while before replying. "I'm doing it for the kids." It wasn't the kindest response, but it was the truth. A few days later, Mike dropped by unannounced. "Figured you could use some company," he said, holding up a six-pack. We sat on the porch, sipping beers while the sun dipped below the horizon. "So how'd it go?" he asked. I sighed. "She's sorry. She wants to fix things. But I don't know if I can trust her again." Mike nodded. "That's fair. Trust doesn't come back overnight. It might not come back at all." "I'm not sure I even want it to," I admitted. "Part of me thinks it'd be easier to just walk away. Start over." "And the other part?" he asked. I took a long sip, staring out at the street. "The other part keeps thinking about the kids. About what it'd do to them if we split." "Greg, you can't stay just for the kids," Mike said gently. "They need you happy and whole. Not stuck in something that tears you apart." That night, as I tucked Ellie into bed, she looked up at me with those big, innocent eyes. "Daddy, are you and Mommy going to be okay?" Her question hit me like a freight train. "We're trying, sweetie," I said, brushing her hair back. "We're trying our best." But even as I said it, I wasn't sure if it was true. The days blurred together as I tried to make sense of everything. Every decision felt like a crossroads: stay and try to fix things, or walk away and start over. Neither option seemed right. The weight of it all sat heavy on my chest, making it hard to breathe. Sandra texted a few times asking how I was, if I needed anything, if I'd thought more about counseling. I kept my replies brief, unsure of how much to share. One evening, she called. I almost didn't answer, but something in me couldn't ignore it. "Hi," she said softly. "I know you're still angry, but I wanted to check in. How are you holding up?" "I'm fine," I said, though it was far from the truth. There was a pause before she said, "I've been thinking about us, about everything. I know I broke your trust, and I don't expect you to forgive me overnight. But I want to do whatever it takes to make this right." Her voice cracked, and I could hear the strain in her words. "I'll give you space if that's what you need, but please, don't shut me out completely." I didn't respond right away. Finally I said, "Sandra, I don't know if this can be fixed. I don't know if I even want it to be." She sniffled. "I understand. But I'm not giving up on us." The conversation left me more conflicted than ever. That night, I wrote down everything swirling in my head. The kids, the betrayal, the moments I missed the life we built. Seeing it all on paper didn't make the decision easier, but it helped me sort through the chaos. The next morning, Ellie came into my room with a drawing. It was a picture of our family, all holding hands with big smiles. "I made this for you," she said proudly. I stared at it, my throat tightening. "Thanks, sweetheart. It's beautiful." As she skipped away, I realized something. Whatever decision I made, it wasn't just about me and Sandra. It was about them too. They deserved stability, love, and honesty, even if that meant giving up on the idea of a perfect family. The weeks following the counseling session felt like an eternity. I spent every free moment weighing my options, replaying the past and imagining the future. Every time I thought I'd made up my mind, doubts crept in. But one thing became clear: no matter what I decided, the kids came first. I called Sandra one evening after the kids were asleep. "We need to talk," I said. She arrived the next day, her face pale and drawn. We sat at the kitchen table, the same spot where I'd first confronted her. The air was heavy, but I felt oddly calm. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," I began. "About us, about the kids, about everything." She nodded, bracing herself. "I don't think we can go back to the way things were," I said. Her face fell, but I continued. "Too much has happened. The trust is gone, and I don't know if it'll ever come back." Tears streamed down her cheeks, but she stayed silent. "That being said," I added, "we're still their parents. They need both of us, and I want us to find a way to co-parent that's healthy for them. But as for us," I paused, the words catching in my throat. "I think it's over, Sandra." She sobbed quietly, covering her face with her hands. I'm so sorry, Greg. I never wanted this to happen. I've ruined everything. I swallowed the lump in my throat. You made choices, Sandra. And now we're here. The rest of the conversation was practical. How to explain things to the kids, how to share custody, how to move forward. It was painful, but there was also a strange relief in having a plan, however imperfect. That weekend, we sat Ellie and Max down together. Sandra started, her voice trembling but steady. Mommy and Daddy love you both very much, but we've decided that we're better as friends. We'll always be here for you, no matter what. Ellie frowned. Does this mean Mommy's not coming home? I leaned forward, taking her hand. It means you'll have two homes and we'll both still be with you all the time. Nothing will change how much we love you. Max didn't say much, just crawled into Sandra's lap and hugged her tight. Ellie followed, and soon we were all tangled in a tearful embrace. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. And in that moment it felt like the best we could do. Over the following months, Sandra and I settled into our new normal. It wasn't easy, there were tense moments, miscommunications, and days when the pain resurfaced. But we stayed civil for the kids. Slowly the wounds began to heal. I won't pretend everything is fine now. I still struggle with anger and sadness, and I still miss the life we had before. But I'm learning to let go. To focus on the kids, on myself, on building a future that feels solid again. As for Sandra, I think she's trying too. We're not the family we used to be, but we're still a family in a different way. And for now, that's enough.